Um, yeah, so this is the third in the sessions of four sessions. Next week will be the last session based on the trip I'm going to Maui to do um, four sessions over a weekend. I'm trying to think of how I was just telling Karen that there's so much material here. It might be too much material. And this week's no less. And so I'm trying to figure out how I could dumb things down a little bit to make it a little bit easier for people to take in. Um, if any of you have any ideas, please let me know. So last week we got to the point of looking at how the fundamental Buddhism has the breakdown of teaching, practice, and attainment, and how Shinan Shonin used that as his foundation for the writings that he wrote. But I was telling you last week about the prolific nature of Shinan's writings and how he had yeah, basically from his 50s on, he became a very, very prolific writer. And this book here is his collected works, a translation of his collected works. And it is um, quite thick, as you can see. This is a English translated version. And it starts off with the canon of his work, which is the true teaching, practice, attainment of the Pure Land Way. And I had mentioned, I think I mentioned last week that yeah, if you have insomnia, this is a great way to cure that because you could start off by reading this and guaranteed you'll be asleep within 15 minutes. And the reason why that is because not it was not written in intention for the average lay person. In fact, it was written for scholars, learned monks who can read the Chinese, what we call the Kambun. And it was it's almost like a university thesis to argue of the validity of the Nembutsu teaching that Shinan had learned from his teacher Honen Shonin. So it is a very difficult piece to read. Let me just bring up. Yeah, you can all see that. Let me just gonna increase. Oop, is that too big? Maybe that's too low. Okay. So this is the third in the session, and what I wanted to talk about a little bit today was to go back over. Well, actually, I'm going to start off because I had mentioned about Shinran Shonin. I'm just going to. Yeah, there's a lot of material to it. So this is actually all the writings of Shinran Shonin. So the first one, the true teaching, practice, and realization of the Pure Land Way, is broken down into 6 chapters. A chapter on teaching, chapter on practice, chapter on Shinjin, interesting heart, chapter on realization, and then the chapter on the true Buddha and land, and also the chapter on the transformed Buddha bodies and lands. So these 6 chapters are comprise this major the canon of Shinran's works, but So when I mention about the fundamental Buddhism and breaking down uh, like the Eightfold Noble Path, that you could break it down into teaching, practice, and attainment. Uh, what Shinran added was this chapter on Shinjin. See number 3 here, and Shinjin is, as I said, in trusting heart. It was often translated earlier as faith, but a lot of people today don't like that term. They feel it's too loaded, that they don't like using that terminology. So they use Shinjin as entrusting heart, entrusting heart. And this was something that Shinran emphasizes. Now, in general Buddhism, often it's sort of a given that this Shinjin goes with the practice. So, in other words, unless you have, uh, unless you truly um, believe in the teachings, then the practice is meaningless, right? So they sort of encapsulate this within practice. But Shinran found that this was actually the most important part, is this awakening of the entrusting heart. So he comprised a whole chapter on just that, because he felt that that was really the essence of what the Buddha wanted to teach. So we'll get, hopefully we'll get to that. We'll get to that when we get to the Shoshinge, which I will probably end up doing next week. But here are some of his other writings. So uh, when he was like 76, he started writing all these poems. And so there's the hymns of the Pure Land, and the hymns of the Pure Land masters, and the hymns of Dharma ages. And so these are like 118 verses of the Pure Land poems. Um, so what these poems are, if you're, when we have our Sunday services, and we normally chant, or when we chant the Shoshinge, and usually at the end of that Shoshinge, we also chant what we call the Wasan. And here in North America, we only chant the first 6 wasans. But in Kyoto, at our mother temple, what they do is every morning. So if you go to Kyoto, at the Nishi Honganji, which is our mother temple, they have a morning service. So in the summertime, it starts at 6 a.m. And in the wintertime, they let you sleep in half an hour more. So it starts at 6:30. Now, let me tell you though, 6:30 in January in Japan, where they don't have central heating, it gets quite cold. If it's 5 degrees outside, it's 5 degrees inside. So, anyways, if you go to the Honganji, the Mother Temple, they have 2 main halls. One on the north side is called the Amida Hall. And in that hall, so they start off there every morning. So on a usual day, if it's not a special memorial for one of the previous Gomonshus, if it's just a regular day, they start off and they start by chanting what's known as the Sambutsuge. We chant the Sambutsuge regularly at our Sunday services as well. The Sambutsuge is a song that comes from the larger sutra of Amida, and it with the how they chant it, it takes about 10 to 15 minutes to chant that one, Sambutsuge. So once they chant the Sambutsuge, then everybody stands up, and then they move over to the next hondo or hall, which is down this wooden walkway, and you enter it, and that's what we call the Founders Hall, or Goedo in Japanese. And in the center of that one, they have an image of Shinran Shonin. So actually, it's uh, this wooden statue that I showed at the very beginning here, that's what they actually have. Let me just scroll up to it. This image here, okay? They have this in place where the statue of the Buddha is in the Amida Hall. So in the Founders Hall, they have this image of Shinran Shoni, and so there, every morning, they would chant the Shoshin Nembutsuge. So the Shoshinge is a song that comes out from this true teaching, practice, and realization of the Pure Land way. Then at the end of the Shoshinge, we have what's called Nembutsu Wasan. Nembutsu Wasan. And there's 6 Wasan that we chant. So when we chant the Shoshinge here, yeah, you might recall, like, if it's just Roy Sensei and myself, we take turns leading the Wasan, the first line of the Wasan. We take turns. So if the more ministers there are in the Onaijin, the more it gets passed amongst the ministers. But normally we chant 6 of the Wasan, and here in North America we chant the first 6. But in Japan, at the Honganji, and in many temples throughout Japan, when they have their morning service, they rotate. So they'll chant the first 6, and then the next day they'll chant the next 6. And as you can see, so there's 118 verses in the Pure Land hymns, and then there's 119 in the Pure Land Masters hymn, and then there's 116 in the hymns on the Dharma ages. Okay, so these wasans, they're poems that Shinran Shonin wrote in his latter years, and they differ from the Shoshinge in that they are written in a more colloquial Japanese, everyday language of the Japanese. They're not written in the Chinese kanbun. There are some characters in there, but mainly they are written in hiragana, uh, which is the phonetic alphabet. So these poems were written for the average person, the local person. So that's why they're sometimes easier to understand than the harder Chinese language. And you know, the most famous one of this is the Ondoksan that we sing at the end of our services. That's actually one of the poems. Nyorai Daihi no Ondoku wa 身を粉にしても報ずべし、刺繍知識の音読も骨を砕きても射すべし. So that is a poem that Shinran wrote, and it basically states, you know, the debt that we owe to Amida Buddha, although our bodies be crushed, we must repay, and to the teachers that have gone before us. Although our bones be broke, we must repay in gratitude. But it was written in a much easier language to understand than some of the other writings. So again, in Japan, they have all of these verses, or in Japanese, and they chant them daily at the Honganji. So that's the hymns in Japanese. And he also wrote some commentaries, notes on essentials of faith alone, notes on one calling and many calling, notes on the inscriptions of the sacred scrolls, and there's a collection of letters that he had written to some of the followers out on the east end of Japan, and a collection of just random letters. So these are all the writings that we know that Shinran had written. So he was actually a very prolific writer. So the first one he had written towards other monks, as I mentioned before. I think I mentioned before that Shinran in his life. Oh yeah, I mentioned about how the Nembutsu teaching was being persecuted at one point. And when he was 35 years old, he was sent to northern Japan. He was defrocked and he ended up getting married. But he called himself neither monk nor layman. And then from that point on, that's when his writings really began. Was when he went up to northern Japan, and then he continued on to eastern Japan, north of the Kanto area, north of Tokyo, and he spent about 20 years there. And it's there that he made many followers from out east. He didn't have a temple. He had just a small hermitage type place, but people would regularly come asking him for guidance. And so he would teach. And so these songs that he wrote, these poems that he wrote, were a way for him to teach these local people. And then the letters that he wrote as well, they were often to those people who were out east once he returned to Kyoto in his 60s. So these are the letters of Shinran. And then another very famous one is the record, a record and lament of divergence. This, or Tanisho, you may have heard of the Tanisho, but this was actually not written by Shinran. It was written by his disciple, Yu Yenbo. And it was written a number of years after Shinran had actually passed away. But nonetheless, because Yu Yenbo writes it as direct recollection of conversations he had with Shinran, we view this as words of Shinran. And then the Essentials of Faith Alone, Yui Shinsho, is a copy of another one of so Shinran Chonin basically copied somebody else's teaching. It wasn't plagiarism, but at that time, that was one way of learning is copying the works of somebody else. So those were the writings in his 91 years that he was alive. But getting back to this whole idea of practice, so we have the basic teachings, and in the basic Buddhist teachings, the analogy that was quite often used was the analogy of a mountain, where the teaching is the path or the way that shows you the way up the mountain. So there are many different paths going up, leading up. Oh, hang on a second. There's somebody. Oh, Tomoku's joining. Okay. So there are many paths that you can take to get to the top of the mountain. But so the different paths are the practice that lead you to the top. And ultimately, the goal is to get to the pinnacle, the very top of the mountain. And so with the Four Noble Truths, the first teaching, this was seen as the first two of the Four Noble Truths, the truth of suffering and the causation of suffering. These were seen to be sort of the initial awakening. So if you compare it to somebody climbing up the mountain, it was when you get to the foot of the mountain and you realize at that point that you had been walking aimlessly until then um, around the foot of the mountain. But then you see this pathway that leads out of the forest and up to the top. And so the first two of the Four Noble Truths is a realization that you've been just sort of aimlessly walking. And then once you realize, oh, there is a path here, then you start climbing up that mountain. And that's the Noble Eightfold Path in the early teachings. And then ultimately getting to that pinnacle of enlightenment. So within the Mahayana Buddhism, So in Buddhism in general, we have these two major divisions, what we call the Theravada or Way of the Elders, and they would have been very much looking at the teachings like I explained to this mountain definition. Um, and then you have another one, which was the Mahayana, and this development was through northern Asia, China, Korea, Japan. It became very popular. And there were three things about Mahayana movement that really made it flourish. The first was that it was a, it was a Buddhism for lay individuals. This is when Buddhism encompassed or welcomed, I guess, lay followers. That you didn't actually have to leave your daily existence in order to listen to the Dharma or to be able to find a way in the Dharma. And part of the reason of this was this idea of merit transference. So there was an idea that your actions, you could receive merit from somebody else's actions. And you could also transfer your merit to others as well. And this was actually a very important aspect of why Amida Buddha became more and more popular, because we are now receiving the merit of Amida Buddha's practice. Um, and that merit is what we call, or the awakening to that merit is what we call shinjin or entrusting heart. But I'll get to that a little bit more. But this concept of transference of merit is very important. And then also the other thing with the Mahayana path, they emphasize what we call the bodhisattva, six paramitas, or the bodhisattva path. And these six, they're sort of like the Eightfold Noble Path. They're bodhisattva. They actually call them bodhisattva perfections, but they're practices that you can perfect. Dana paramita, selfless giving, um, generosity of giving of self. So when this says selfless giving, it doesn't mean, people ask, well, what does that mean? Selfless giving. How can you give without the self? Well, what selfless giving really means is that you give 100% of yourself, so that there isn't an inkling of an ulterior motive. Um, so, a good example of this I've used before in Dharma talks is, when I first Karen, I'm going to be sending out this out to you. So, I mean, if you want to take notes, you're more than welcome to, but I will send this out to you. Um, the example I use here is when this goes way back when I first came back from Japan to Toronto, and I was first uh, assigned as a minister to Toronto. The very first Halloween that we were there, it was the first time that I was now the homeowner as opposed to the one receiving the candies, right? And I was feeling quite proud to be able to give the candies out to the kids, right? But as the night wore on, um, I noticed that some of the kids, they were just come up, they would get the candy and they'll run off, right? And after a while, it started uh, getting on my nerves, and I complained to my wife. I said, "The kids nowadays, they have no appreciation." I said, and she looked at me and she said, "Get over myself," because for the kids, they just want getting their coming out for the trick or treating, getting candies. Here I'm thinking, I'm this benevolent being handing out candies. People should be appreciative of my actions, right? So here is a case of not Dana, okay? Because I have an expectation that these kids should be appreciative, right? That's not true Dana. Dana is if I can truly um, think about the others without having uh, any ulterior, thinking of myself. And the closest thing that will come is I guess parental love is often considered selfless giving, in that the parent will do anything for the child, sometimes to the detriment. So dana, paramita, sila, discipline, morality, right conduct. Santi is patience, tolerance, endurance, perseverance. Vira, effort, diligence. Dhyana is contemplation, concentration. And then praj, prajna paramita, which is wisdom, insight. So in the Mahayana teachings, it became very important, or through many of the schools in Mahayana Buddhism, it was felt that by doing these bodhisattva practices, by perfecting these bodhisattva practices, over time, your practices become more altruistic without thinking of the self. And that's when it becomes great practice, great compassion. And it becomes what we call, and when this stage is reached, it is known as non-discriminatory wisdom, or prajna paramita. And what prajna paramita means, non-discriminatory wisdom or perfection, um, and this idea of a non-self or sunyata, emptiness, it comes out from this. So what it means is, when we say, you may have heard of this term sunyata before, and often, or so it's often defined, sunyata is defined as emptiness. Um, when they translate it into English. But it's not emptiness as in nothing. It means emptiness in the sense that there is no dichotomy between subject and object. So that it becomes one. And that's what we call also this non discriminatory wisdom. And so that became a very important aspect of this Mahayana uh, practices, many of the schools, where this idea of this uh, non-discriminatory oneness that exists. And around the first century AD, this became a very popular teaching, and there were a number of teachings that were introduced around that time in the Mahayana school. And the most famous of these is probably the Heart Sutra, uh, Prajnaparamita Sutra. And the first line of that states, when Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva was practicing deep prajnaparamita, they saw that the five aggregates are all empty. Here then, form is none other than emptiness, emptiness none other than form. Form is only emptiness, emptiness only form. So again, um, sometimes people look at this and say, "Well, that's mind twisting or hard to figure out." But it's basically saying reality. It's like looking at the ocean and saying the wave and the ocean are one. On one hand, we can see a wave, but we also know that that wave is only a uh, temporal phenomenon. So that's also the ocean at the same time. And yet at the same time, we can see a wave as an individual wave as well. So it's both the same. But so this ideology of in Mahayana Buddhism of something that surpasses the self becomes very important. And this also lends into the Pure Land ideals. And in fact, that Amida Buddha, in his stage as a bodhisattva, made the ultimate practice or vows, and became the pinnacle, if you will, and the merits that this Bodhisattva Dharmakara achieved. He then became Amida Buddha, who was able to transfer the merits and practice to beings filled with blind passion, and that is uh, us, sentient beings. So, as part of this, going hand in hand with this, why this became of paramount importance is because around this time in China, what was formulated this whole idea of chronological time in Buddhism, and there are a number of um, teachings that come up that talks about the various Dharma ages. And the most famous of these is what we call the three Dharma ages. And this is based on this idea of the teaching, practice, and enlightenment, where the first 500 years after the Buddha passed away was known as the true or right Dharma age. And all these three, the teachings are still very much intact. And there are many who follow the teachings as they were taught. And then they also attain enlightenment. So the first 500 years after the Buddha passed away was considered this right or true Dharma age. Then for the next 1,000 years, it was called the semblance Dharma age. This is a Dharma age where the teachings still exist, but people are not following it to heart. It's not as pure as the first 500 years. So people are going through the motion, but they're not necessarily really um, following it to with their heart, if you will. So it's more the motions that they're going through, and because of that, fewer people are attaining enlightenment. Okay? Now, the last 10,000 years is what we call the last Dharma age, and according to this period, um, it was said that the secular world grows. There are very less and less people truly practicing the teachings, and because of that, there are very few who actually attain enlightenment during this period, following the fundamental practices. And this is also why it was believed that because we're in this last Dharma age, because it's so much more difficult to practice, that this idea of merit transference, the idea that Amida's merit transference transfers to us, and by awakening or receiving this entrusting heart, there's a pathway that is available for beings in this time period, and that's the practice that is emphasized by Shinan Shonin, is the practice of uh, receiving the name and reciting the name, and it's considered a great practice because it was the Buddha, or I mean the Buddha, in his vows stated that uh, if he should attain enlightenment, that the Buddhas in the 10 quarters will all praise his name and encourage others to recite the name of the Buddha. So it was a practice that was designated by all the Buddhas, and that's why it's considered a true practice. Um, One minister uh, gave a Dharma talk. As he was our guest one of the services, and he was talking about when you don't know the direction in an unfamiliar place, If you receive guidance from somebody that knows the road, then it's very easy for you to follow that guidance. But if you don't have that, then you're lost. And so basically, the guidance from all the Buddhas is telling us, receive this name of Amida and recite the name of Amida. Okay, and in that name, the name itself is composed of two halves. One is the name of the Buddha, Amida, and then the other half is uh, my taking refuge in the Buddha. Um, is there questions? Hmm? Or was that from last week? Okay. Oh, somebody like, sorry, I was just reading the comments. Okay. Um, so anyways, where was I? Yeah, so this is the last Dharma age that we're in, and Shinran Shonin himself felt very strongly that he was already into this last Dharma age since the Buddha passed away, and hence um, this was the right path. Now, this whole idea of the last Dharma age comes about through the seven patriarchs of Jodo Shinshu. I believe it was either Don Tanwan, Donnan, or Tao Tao Cho Doshaku. One of the Chinese monks, anyways. They talk about burning wood, and if you burn green wood, you don't get a nice fire. The wood has to be nicely dry. So, what they were trying to emphasize is that um, the conditions have to be right. And so, um, in the first 500 years, the conditions are right for one to practice and follow the teachings as they were taught, and attain enlightenment that way. But as you get further away from the historical Buddha, it becomes more and more difficult. And so, in this particular uh, last Dharma age, the most appropriate teaching is this what we call the Nembutsu teaching. So that was one of the seven patriarchs mentioned that finding or matching the condition with the time, right? So um, that's how he comes up with this, and Shinran becomes a very strong believer in that as well, and that's why uh, for Shinran, although he spent 20 years on Mount Hiei trying to perfect his practices, he was unable to attain enlightenment. In fact, the harder he practiced, the further he felt from his goal of attaining enlightenment. And that's why he comes to also to this conclusion that in this last Dharma age, as hard as he tries, there's really nothing he can do to attain enlightenment. And hence he lets go to the working of Amida Buddha. And in fact, that was when it was like a great weight that was lifted off his shoulder when he realized that uh, it wasn't him, but it was through the working of the Dharma that he is allowed, if you will, to be awakened. Um, Up until then, what he was thinking Mount Hiei was he had to perfect the practice. He had to fulfill the vows. He had to do this. He had to do that. And it became a great, great weight upon him that he was unable to attain enlightenment in that fashion. So it was only when he let go of all that, basically, that he was able to set himself free. Dr. Ken Tanaka, of course, has written in his introductory book into Jodo Shinshu called Ocean, and he uses the example of a sailor who's thrown overboard in the middle of the night in the middle of the ocean. and at first he really struggles to stay afloat. But the harder he struggled, the more difficult he found it, and in the end, he ends up giving up. But at that moment that he gives up, he finds that he's able to just float on the surface of the ocean, and so by giving up or relaxing, he found his way um, to be able to survive. So this is an example that Professor Tanaka had made quite famous in his book Ocean. Yeah. So, anyways, that's the three Dharma ages. There are some other Dharma age theories, but I'm not even going to go into that because it'll take too long. Okay. Um, so as I mentioned, Shinan saw this, and he writes that in the largest sutra is written, "In the days to come, the paths of the sutra will come to extinction. I, with compassion and mercy, will purposefully make this sutra survive for 100 years. Anybody who, 100 years after the extinction, anybody who encounters the sutra will, according to their wishes, surely attain enlightenment." This is actually at the end of the Amida, the largest sutra. It said that Amida Buddha states that this will be the last sutra to remain. So, in the last Dharma age, this is the right sutra, if you will. Okay. So, through this, Shinran realizes, or through the various writings, through the larger sutra, through the Amida Sutra, through the Contemplation Sutra, Shinran comes to that awakening. Of course, through his teachings from Hon and Shonin, Shinran comes to that conclusion that for this Dharma age, this Dharma period, the Nembutsu teaching is the absolute teaching that one should follow. And so for us, it is a very important practice. And you know, I'm not even going to go there today. So when we talk about following the practice and according to the Nembutsu teachings, it is this is the reason why we follow it. And next week I will get into the introduction just briefly, the Shoshinge, which is the song that is at the end of the chapter of practice, which is also, it bridges it with this chapter on Shinjin, or entrusting heart. And it starts off with what we call the profession of faith. And I'll get into that, but yeah, we'll get into that next week. I'll stop here for today. Are there questions, comments? Please feel free to.
Yes, I'd like to ask some question.
Yes. Okay. Let me just.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Why this third age, like a Dharma age? No, after that, 10,000 years. We just Mappo after
Mappo?
Mappo, no
Yeah.
one has been enlightenment other than three Chando Danshak. Sorry, I can't pronounce. So 32 great monks became Bosatsu. How come this is so difficult after that 1,000 years?
Oh,
1,500, sorry. After that, 10,000, but
Why is it so difficult?
yeah.
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess because of the what we consider to be enlightenment. Um, we end up in a period of defilement where
Mhm. Mm. I see.
it doesn't mean that nobody attains, but it's very, very difficult. And I think with Shinan Shoni, he often he never wrote or he never taught in a way that to sort of look down at people saying you it was more self-reflection than
Mm.
anything else, and for him he found it impossible to attain enlightenment. The harder he practiced, the more he felt he was further away from what he wanted to get.
Mm.
And what he found was that the more he practiced, the more he saw his egocentric self, is what it
Mm.
was.
Mhm.
And so um, he felt for himself that he was unable to get rid of that egocentric self using his own power. In other words, the example that's often used is so in Jodo Shinshi, we call it tariki or other power, the power of Amida Buddha
Yeah,
versus jiriki, which is self power. Okay,
right.
so when we talk about tariki, um, it's not that there's no self effort involved, but
Mhm.
it's an external source that helps us to see the truth. And so the example that's sometimes used is like if you're in a dark room, you
Mhm.
cannot see your own self.
Mhm.
But when you have a light source and a reflective mirror, that's the only time you could really see yourself, right?
Mhm.
Through the mirror. So the light in this case would be Amida Buddha, and the mirror is the teachings. Okay, so for Shinran, having that light was very important to him because he was trying to see himself in a dark room. And no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't see himself
Mhm.
or um, and so for him, the only path during this period was through the Nembutsu teachings because he felt that that was the light. The Amida was the light that shone on him, that showed him his true self. And when I say true self, it means both good and bad. It's, he saw who he was, that he was completely unable to fulfill his practices on his own. Yet through the light of Amida, he realized that even as he was, it was okay. He was guaranteed of attaining
Mhm.
birth in the Pure Land, which ultimately means attaining enlightenment.
Oh, I
So
see.
for Shinran, this idea became very important. But having said all that, when you're in a dark room or when you're in a room that has a light and the mirror, there is also one third aspect that's important is that you have to be facing the mirror. And so there's effort that's needed that you're
Mhm.
facing the right direction. If you're facing away from the mirror, you can't see yourself, right?
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
but we don't say that this is um, self power in the sense that I'm facing the mirror, but it's actually through the light and the mirror that allows me to see my reflection. Okay, so there's effort that's involved. So listening is very important. Trying to understand, um, and often the more you listen, the more you realize how little you know. And, the more I try to learn things, the more it seems like I seem to find out how little I truly know. And so um, having you listening to me on these talks as well, it really makes me understand my limitations as well.
Very good illustration. Thank you.
Okay.
Explain.
Any
Thank
other comments or questions? Yes, Karen.
you.
I'm just curious about Amida Buddha. Was
Okay.
he a real person like Siddhartha Gautama, the original Buddha?
No, so Amida is what we call a Buddha of recompense. In as Buddhism advances, they start talking about they call them Dharma bodies, Dharmakaya, and so there's uh, one is called the Dharma body itself, Dharmakaya, and that has no form, no shape. It is sort of the universe. It's beyond our conceptualization. But the one thing that Dhammakaya has is it has a necessity to express itself. It has to. It's the reality of the universe, and that has to express itself. And so it takes on a couple of forms. One is called Sambhoga Gaya, the Buddha recompense, and these are almost like symbols of the truth. So um, it's taking something that is beyond our conceptualization and making it into something that we can sort of grasp. And there are many of these Buddhas that are expressions of the truth. The third is what we call Nirmanakaya. Nirmanakaya is actually a Buddha that takes form, and that's in our case Shakyamuni Buddha, the historical Buddha. So the differences are that with the Nirmanakaya, the Buddha with the body, like Shakyamuni, the Buddha in our timeline. This Buddha, it said that there's a beginning, there's a middle, and there's an end. Okay, so the historical Buddha was born, lived, and died, passed away. With the Sambhogakaya, the Buddha recompense, no, not recompense, that's not the right word. Anyways, the Amida Buddha is one of these Buddhas. They're more so the eternal Buddhas. There is a story that has a beginning. So this Buddha was once a bodhisattva called Dhammakara. So there's a whole um, story about the beginning of this Buddha and how this Buddha made these vows to become a Buddha, became a bodhisattva, and then became a Buddha. But they don't have. There's no end to these Buddhas. So it's said in the sutras that even today that this Amida is present all around us, and they call it the metaphor used is Amida's pure land. But when we say Amida's pure land, we don't take it literally like um, a place that. Well, you can take it literally. It's both literal and figuratively, um, but it is more a symbol, if you will, of the truth, because the Dharmakaya, the Dharma body, as I mentioned, has no form, no shape. So it's very difficult for us to grasp. It's a very abstract concept. But from that, to show us that that exists, comes this Amida Buddha. And there are many other Buddhas that are talked about. The historical Buddha talks about all these different Buddhas so that we can grasp the infinite, if you will. I don't know if does that make any sense to you?
Yeah, yeah. Thank you very much.
Are there any other questions or comments? Anything's fine.
Mine you answered throughout your talk, actually, regarding why. And I think also, is it Junichi
Yeah.
Hashimoto? Yeah, he also kind of asked the same question that I had sort of posited. Just the different ways that we have become further away, I guess, from enlightenment. Yeah.
Yeah. So, it's funny because so one of the things that I had it's in the what I handed out. Let me just bring that up again. One of the timelines when we talk about the different times, and I just mentioned the three Dharma theory, but there's also Shinran looks at our time as being this last Dharma age is associated with the 5 defilements. And one is defilement of kalpa, means that the period when famine, plague, and conflicts and wars arise. Okay. Defilement of views, period when erroneous views become popular, leading to perverted views. Defilement of evil passions, period when evil or blind passions abound. Defilement of sentient beings begin to reject the laws of morality, ethics, and principles of cause and effect. They become weak in body and mind. Defilement of lifespan. Due to all the defilements, the average lifespan diminishes. When you look at this, there are a lot of things here that you can say, oh, that sounds like our present situation, especially when I think of things going down in the south of us. You think, oh, goodness gracious, how can this happen? But the reality is, this is our reality as well. So we can't just say it's something that's happening down south in the States. It is our reality. We are part of that reality as well. So, and that actually, these defilements exist. And when we think about this, one of the interesting ones there is they talk about the shorter lifespan. And again, this is all relative. On one hand, I think in our modern North American lifestyle, we lead a very long life. The average lifespan is very long, but I sometimes question what about the quality of life, right? When I visited India in the year 2000, we went on a pilgrimage, and one of the incidents that I'll never forget was when we were in Bodh Gaya. This is the village that the Buddha attained enlightenment in. And I went for a morning walk, and there's this man who lived literally in a shanty, like a shed, right? He invited me. He called me over as I was going for a morning walk and invited me to join him for his morning chai. Like we couldn't really speak that much to each other, and I thought to myself, there exists humanity where you can invite a perfect stranger to come and join you for morning tea. I mean, how many of us could do that here in North America? How many of us could dare? We don't even look at strangers. We avert our eyes if there's strangers walking. So I think I mean we might say hello, but yeah, the, definitely our quantity of life is increased here, but what about the quality? And I sometimes question that. So the length of life shortens. You don't take it. You don't have to take it literally. It might be the length of life. Yes, might increase, but the quality may not be there.
Hmm.
It's great if the length of life and the quality is also there. That's great. That's wonderful. And I'm sure all of you have very high quality life. So, but
Well,
anyways,
some people very how say rich Americans maybe or they're very conscious about life to extend the life.
oh,
They take supplements, hundreds of supplements per day
yes,
to be happy, to live happier and longer. So that that is funny, it's a funny phenomena in this what you said. Yours is the truth, but the
yeah,
people think very differently.
yes, very differently.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you everyone, and I'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Again, if you have any comments or questions, please feel free to email me as well. Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
Okay. Thank
Thank
you
you very
very
much.
much. Good
Thank you,
night.
Sensei.
Thank you.